Hello, and you're joining us here on Melt. I'm Ritvika Gupta, and on the show today we'll be speaking to Prakash Varma. Now, he heads Nirvana Films. Nirvana Films is known for making ads for brands like Vodafone, Titan, and Flipkart. Anant had a good chat with him. Hi, Anant.
Hello.
Anant, when we speak about ad filmmakers, names like Ram Madhvani, Prasoon Pandey, Ayappa, they come to my mind instantly. So I want to begin by asking you, what is the role of an ad filmmaker today, and why is it necessary to hear from a filmmaker on Melt?
See, we are still a TV business in India. The advertising can't survive without television. Brands can't communicate to consumers without television. And Prakash, over the last 20 years, has done some seminal work for brands. But more interesting than individual pieces of work is the body of work he's done with various clients. I mean, every single ad that you've ever seen on Vodafone, which started as Hutch, has been done by Nirvana Films. And that's crazy. I mean, how come one production house gets to do all the films with one client?
Yeah.
And maybe that's the focus of the conversation I have with him, which is how important is the client production house, a client producer relationship, and how does it impact brands positively?
Right. Now, tell me, how involved is an ad filmmaker, in creating a commercial? Is he allowed to take a few creative calls if he wants to add something, change something in the script?
Well, he has to be allowed to. Otherwise, don't get him. You get a good producer, get a good production house. In essence, they have to interpret a brief and a script. They have to interpret it, and that's not done in isolation. So, as Prakash explains in the chat, the producer sits with the client, the creative director, and the three of them jointly try and interpret the film to the best possible outcome in terms of how the brand communicates with the consumer.
All right, so it's going to be an interesting chat. So let's hear it from the man himself. Let's get ready to melt with Prakash Varma.
Varma, thank you for talking to us.
Great pleasure.
So what I want to do with you today is to explore, you make films. How does it matter whether the client is a good client or bad client? There's a budget, there's a script, he gives you a check, and that should be the end of it, right?
Yeah, but very, very valid question. I think it's very important to have really good client. For me, in fact, I'm quite fortunate to work with some really brilliant minds, client, agency, and some great production team. I think why it is important and why I said that I'm fortunate is because big major chunk of my work worked purely because of the kind of trust they gave me, and you got to be really lucky to be in a situation like that.
Right.
And especially a very important stage in my life, got an opportunity to work with a brand called Hutch, and then I just walked in.
Now, that is the pug film you're talking about.
I'm talking about the dog and
yeah. So tell me, what is the role of the client? Now, presumably, as
Right.
happens in any ad, somebody gave you a script, and you should shoot to the script.
Right.
End of story.
Yeah.
In theory.
Right.
So what is a good client, bad client come in here after that?
Most important thing is trust,
Right.
because that's very, very important for anybody to actually bring something really working in terms of, when you trust somebody, I think the responsibility is yours.
Right.
And the minute you feel that somebody is trusting, I think you put in everything into it, and always magic happens.
Right.
Because I also worked in a situation where there's a little bit of trust issues, and then you can always see the change, the difference.
Okay, go back to the pug film.
Yeah.
And tell me, what was it? I mean, let's say for the sake of this discussion, there are two possible clients. One is the agency,
Right.
One is the brand.
Right.
So these are the two clients.
Right.
So what did the client do that you believed that there was a lot of trust involved, and therefore you had to do better, etc., and therefore you had freedom?
Right.
What is it that happened?
That particular stage, especially the Dog and Boy film when you're talking about, when as a filmmaker, you're getting a brief, which is interesting for a filmmaker to look at a storyline like that. where it just says, wherever you go, our network follows. And you have a boy and a dog. What a brilliant brief for a filmmaker to walk in and to make a film. Now, if you really look at the situation, starting from the client to agency to filmmaker to whatever, those days, if you really look at all the competitors' all the other brands, you have every single film you take, it is just all big celebrities talking big things about all the brands. And then you have a brief where there is nobody. And even at the presentation of before the film is made, when we sit and discuss about the films, you're talking about your brand ambassador is going to be a dog.
Right.
And what is this dog? You have a dog like Pug, where it's actually not familiar with anybody. And those days it was just looking very weird. And then you have people sitting across the table and saying, because it's very easy right now, but those days to say that, okay, let me just go with it and see what happens, and putting money on it, that's pure trust from client to agency, and also for agency to give me an opportunity to say that you go and make the film.
Right. So now you come to the reverse, where you say a lack of trust or some trust issues that are visible. Give me an example, without necessarily naming the brand, because this is not about bashing brands.
Absolutely,
Yeah, but give me an instance of how it hampers you, and therefore hampers the objective of the brand itself.
Yeah, so what happens is, I think the trust, when it comes to that, every stage, every department got to do what they really need to do. Like for a client, it's very important to, actually give a proper brief, and that's their job. And for creative, from agency, it's important to put that down as a script format. And that's it. And when it comes to filmmaker, he really need to do a lot of stuff to communicate that brief properly. So what happens is, if any of this is crossed, if they cross the line,
right,
and get into your job,
right,
like client sitting and saying, this is not the line, I think this should be crafted like this, why can't you add this word or whatever? Or even for me, anybody coming down and saying that, this shot or this angle or this particular cast, then what happens is, you're slightly, for me especially, I get damn confused, because I'm actually traveling in one path, and then I'm going in the direction, and if I'm disturbed, I have no idea where it will end up.
right.
So it's important to trust at one point and say that you take it, and then it's all yours.
Right. So if I take this to an extreme, after the brief comes to you from the agency, should the client even come to the shoot, for example? Should he come?
In fact, I think my experience, most of the time, yes, there were situations that they were there, but I've heard stories, but not in my sets, where conversation and discussions about what the creative should be. Ideally, I have no idea what they will do in a shooting location. It's not required.
Okay, now I'll flip from this, where perhaps in a shooting situation, the client was not required physically, but was required to be there, at least in communication, which was Zuzu's. Right. So tell us why. No, Zuzu's, at least anecdotally, I believe it could not have happened without this partnership between Nirvana and Ogilvy and Vodafone.
Yeah.
Not possible.
Right.
So, however, the client was not there in South Africa when you shot it. So tell me, what is the communication line at that point, and how did it help that the client trusted you?
Again, a right example for trust, because if you really look at that particular campaign, there is no reference point to a campaign like this.
Right.
Like that. There's no look reference, the kind of character, where exactly this is going to go. But I think from the client side, it was very, very important for them. It was just single brief saying that I want powerful films every day.
Right.
Every day, different films. And it is you guys to figure it out. And by the time, also the most beautiful thing is this: over the years, relationship, teamwork, everything became very strong.
Right.
So we knew each other. Everybody knew their talent. Everybody knew who was powerful in terms of whatever they're doing, and they just kept it. And it's unbelievable those days to say that, okay, now I want 30 films, because this is the platform that I can do this and go and make it.
Right.
So it was great to have people like Rajiv, fantastic creative being with me. And every day we were developing, we were thinking, let's do this and let's do that. And that's only possible because, there's an open space for us to say that, come back with great films.
Right. So tell me, that was an experience, say, you had with an Ogilvy and Harith. Yeah, now you take that further and say, if you have a good client and you have a track record of working together and making good films, client leaves the company and then goes somewhere else. And then what happens? What happens to that relationship? I mean, there's a company relationship with you, there's also a human relationship with you.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's a tough situation where, you have that relationship and he takes most of the calls, and then in his absence to move forward, and it was not an easy situation. But as I said, this is a really big team where, the team from Ogilvy remains the same, which is extremely important. In terms of servicing, creative, everybody, we were all there in the initial stage. And then you have very strong creative even after that for such a long time. And the body of work that you have done before, people always remember.
Right.
So there is a kind of respect whoever comes in.
So that's almost institutionalized, that body of work.
Yes. So it was not easy in the beginning, but then they all understood and they gave that due respect when we meet and when we discuss about things. Of course, it's not the same, but I think still we continued doing some great campaigns. The beauty about this is, most beautiful thing, especially with Vodafone, so many films that we have done in last very many years, there many a times also failed. It's not that every time it was successful, but most of the time it worked very well. But even during failures, we all understood and we were together to understand that's where we went wrong. Let's correct that. I mean, that is beautiful, and it's very rare to have that kind of a relationship with a brand and agency and client.
Right.
And that's why I said very fortunate to be in a situation like that.
Right. Now we'll jump from there to a recent film of yours, which is the South Indian Bank film.
Right.
And tell us, what is the role of the client in that film? You're very happy with the film. What is the role of the client in that film?
So this is a South-based company.
Right.
Did a lot of work in last 12, 13 years with a celebrity. Worked very well. But then he really want to make it a little more big, national, and also international in Middle East. So it is very important for them to actually bring in something which is bigger in terms of simple ideas, but it works, that was their brief. But they really didn't know how to take it forward. And they approached me and said, what can we do? And that's a great situation for a film. There's a lot of pressure because then you're taking the whole responsibility and saying that let's try something. So I went back with 2 different routes and they picked one, and not much conversation in terms of creative because, trust was there and they were sure that something will come back out of this. So you're taking that responsibility, going out there, putting all the stuff together. Fortunately, it all worked brilliantly. So now what I'm saying is, currently, the current situation is so different. It's not like how it was before. There's so much pressure purely in terms of most of the brands because of, it's current situation, so many brands, so many people, customers are not that loyal. So because of the competition, there's pressure, and this pressure keeps coming down to every stage, right? So I thoroughly enjoyed being in a situation where everything is, just given to me and say that can we do something?
Right. You spoke about, say, the Vodafone experience where there's a huge body of work, and most of the films worked, some films didn't work, right? Now, when you do only one film for a brand, like you did with South Indian Bank, what happens if the film fails? And how much of the pressure comes onto you if the film fails?
Huge.
Right.
And that's why I said it's, when you take that, it's your responsibility.
Right.
But at one point, just purely being a creative person, even though there's fear, you cut that thought and then you try to put in 100%, whatever that you can do. And I'm sure when you have that kind of mindset, magic just happens.
Right. To come to another, trust is sort of human to human thing almost.
Right.
But sometimes trust comes in the form of an Excel sheet. Where if you work for many large brands, they want line items of your cost and they want to know exactly what is happening to your money and so on and so forth. Now, you take that and compare that with what you did for Rajasthan tourism, where you shot a drone. I'm sure that may or may not have been in the original thought, but the cost was added later. Is that a function of trust? What is it a function of?
The thing is, in fact, for me, I am also very fortunate to have a great producer who's also my wife.
Right.
So from the beginning, we decided that I'm not going to get into cost and the monies and, you divide the cost and this is what. And she also respect that. And there is no discussion in terms of when, most of the time what happens is, always everybody needs the cost like in 2 days.
Right.
And it's impossible for me to sit and structure the film or design my film, put it together saying that this is what it's going to cost.
Right.
Cost is gone. And maybe weeks later, you put the stuff together and then you start adding every time. Every time you meet your technical team, whether it's my DOP or whoever it is, let's do this and let's do that. It's just, you put all that together. So I'm actually have no clue how much that eventually that you're spending. Your only priority is to get the product in the best form.
Right.
And you try that.
Yeah. So is this a good working model then for any production house, that you have a creative guy who doesn't care about the money and you have somebody else looking after the money? Is that a template you would advise all production houses to have?
No, I think for creative, it's very important, but it's also, as a director, it's important to understand, the money factor.
Right.
To say that, okay, this is what roughly that I'm going to spend.
Right.
But if you really go minute, then you're going to compromise. But it's important to understand the budgeting, or else you'll be completely, out of place. So it's important to understand, but when it comes to anything that you add value to it, and sometimes it's not only about money, it's just about a cast. Last minute, just before walking into the location, the shot, then somewhere you're not too sure about the cast. You're not too sure about the character. I might change it and I should have the freedom. So sometimes it's not only money, I might just change it immediately. So yes, coming back to the thing, it's important to understand the budgeting, but if you really go by the boxes and tick mark it, then you're not going to make it's not organic.
Okay, now tell me 4 or 5 brands that you haven't worked on, that you would love to work on and you don't understand why they haven't worked with you.
Okay, Cadbury's.
You haven't worked.
In fact, I did one for Gems, but I think what Ogilvy did with Silk was fantastic. I mean, unbelievable stuff, and of course, all the commercials for Fevicol, every single film.
Which you've never worked on.
Never worked on, and I'll never get the opportunity.
Right.
Yeah, I think Swiggy. Fantastic campaign they have done for Swiggy. Early stage of Flipkart. It was a beautiful campaign, which that I worked on those.
Do you ever pimp for business? You go saying, please give me work. Does that ever happen?
No.
Never.
When I started, in fact, I think I met one agency, and the whole experience was just, it was it was negative in that room. So I said, this is not my scene, and I can't communicate, I can't articulate, because the whole room was negative, and so I didn't feel good. And post that, I just stopped.
Okay. Imagine there's a marketer you've never dealt with before, and you're starting off on a new project. You need to give her some advice on what to do to get the best out of you. You give her advice on how she gets the best out of you.
Again, coming back to the same point that I said earlier, because that is my experience and I seriously believe in it. Whatever the pressure is, it's very important to trust when you hand over a job to whoever.
Right.
Whether it's an agency or a production house. Even for me, coming down to my DOP or a music director, anybody. That's the way. If once I brief, then I have complete trust and I'll be waiting for that. So that's the most key, trust.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Varma.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And that was Prakash Varma in conversation with Anant Rangaswami. Anant, that was an interesting chat. Tell me, what can marketers take away from this conversation?
If they take away just one facet of this conversation, which is the importance of trust in this whole process of creation of great communication, that's all I think is, shall we say, a profitable outcome for the marketer. And there are lots of others, but this is the single most important takeout.
Absolutely. And in an age of, where procurement matters so much, and when technology has made films, making films so easy and affordable, why should agencies, why should brands still, invest in star filmmakers and celebrity filmmakers?
Well, it's the same reason why a brand invests in a great creative director. Finally it's the interpretation. What is the connect? What is the magic that happens to a brief when you give it to a good creative director or give it to a good production house? There's magic in the communication between the brand and the consumer.
Yeah, it's all about taking something and turning it into something memorable.
Absolutely.
Great. On that note, here's presenting the Mel cheat sheet. That's a wrap on this episode of Melt. You can also watch all our content on our social media platforms. Our handle is Ready to Melt, and I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Goodbye.